Hello guys, this is your friend Multiverse Shinobi 2.0 and we are back with a new fanfic. What if Naruto? The Ghost of Amazon Lily. Part 1. Chapter 1. The Weight of the Veil. The air in Amazon Lily was thick, perfumed with the scent of tropical lilies and the salt of the calm belt, but to Naruto, it felt heavy. It was a different kind of heavy than the cold, metallic stench of the chains in Mary Geoise, but it was heavy nonetheless. He sat on the floor of the Empress's private chambers, his small legs crossed. The cloak Gloriosa had thrown over him felt like a lead weight. It was itchy, smelling of dried herbs and old dust, but he didn't pull it off. He had learned younger than any child should, that survival often depended on being still. On being invisible. Across the room, the three sisters stood like statues carved from grief and defiance. He cannot stay in the palace indefinitely without a reason, Gloriosa's voice rasped. She was pacing, her snake staff clicking rhythmically against the polished stone. Click, click, click. The Kuja are curious by nature. They will wonder why the goddess empress keeps her inner sanctum barred even to her most trusted guards. Hancock stood by the wide, open balcony, her back to them. Her long black hair caught the moonlight, shimmering like a dark river. Her shoulders were rigid. Then let them wonder, she said, her voice a cold blade. I am their snake princess. My word is absolute. If I say the inner sanctum is forbidden, then it is a graveyard for any who step across the line. Fear is a temporary shield, Hancock, Gloriosa countered, stopping her pace. You are young. You are traumatized. But you are now a queen. A queen cannot rule only by fear, she must rule by tradition. And tradition says no man sets foot on this soil. Sonia stepped forward, her green hair swaying. Her eyes, usually fierce, were clouded with a protective fury. He isn't a man, elder. He is a child. He is the only reason we didn't lose our minds in that hell. She couldn't bring herself to say the name of the Holy Land. Even the thought of the red earth made her skin crawl, the brand on her back itching as if it were still being seared into her flesh. Mari, the youngest of the sisters, knelt beside Naruto. She reached out, her hand trembling slightly, and brushed a stray blonde whisker-marked cheek that poked out from the hood. Naruto didn't flinch, but his blue eyes tracked her movement with a predatory sharpness that broke Mary's heart. He saved us, elder, Mari whispered. When the fires broke out, when Tiger-san opened the cages. Naruto found us. He didn't run for the exit. He stayed in the shadows and pulled us toward the docks. A 2-year-old shouldn't know how to hide from guards. But he does. Gloriosa looked at the boy. Truly looked at him. Naruto wasn't crying. He wasn't asking for food or a toy. He was watching the room, analyzing the exits, his small body coiled like a spring. He had the disposition of a king, yes, but it was currently wrapped in the instincts of a hunted animal. The world government will send a ship within the month, Gloriosa said, her voice softening but remaining grave. To verify your return. To offer you the position of the Kuja's leader officially. They will look for the marks. They will look for anything out of place. If they find him. They won't. Hancock turned around. Her eyes were red-rimmed but burning with a terrifying resolve. From this moment on, Naruto does not exist. There is no boy. There is only the shadow of the palace. She walked over to Naruto and knelt. She was the most beautiful woman in the world, even in her rags, but to Naruto, she was simply the person who held him when the world screamed. Naruto, she said softly. The boy tilted his head. Hank. His voice was hoarse, unused to speaking. You must stay in this room, she said, pointing to the floor. You must never go to the windows when the sun is up. You must never make a sound when the sisters with the spears are outside the door. If you hear someone who isn't us, you become a stone. Do you understand? A stone doesn't breathe. A stone doesn't move. Naruto looked at the dark corners of the room. He looked at the heavy silk curtains. He had spent his entire life hiding under floorboards and behind tapestries to avoid the whims of the celestial dragons. Stone, he repeated, his voice a tiny echo. Good, Hancock whispered, pulling him into a fierce embrace. Outside, the jungle of Amazon Lily roared with life, the calls of giant birds and the rustle of dangerous predators. But inside the palace, a silence settled that was far more dangerous. It was the silence of a conspiracy. Gloriosa watched them, a heavy feeling in her gut. She knew the history of the Kuja. She knew that secrets on this island had a way of growing, much like the vines in the jungle, until they strangled the very structures that held them. I will prepare the false records, Gloriosa said, turning toward the door. But remember, Hancock, a boy grows. You can hide a cub in a basket, but you cannot hide a lion in a cage forever. As the door clicked shut, the four of them, the three broken sisters and the boy who shouldn't exist, sat in the dark, the moonlight their only witness. Naruto leaned his head against Hancock's shoulder. He was tired. So very tired. He closed his eyes, lulled by the steady heartbeat of the woman who had claimed him as her own. He didn't know he was a man in a land of women. He didn't know he was a freed slave in a land of warriors. He only knew that for the first time, the air didn't smell like blood. Chapter 2. The Whispering Palace. 3 years passed like a held breath. In the sun-drenched markets of Amazon Lily, the Kuja sang of their beautiful snake princess. They spoke of the three sisters who had escaped the clutches of the world nobles, and returned to lead their nation into a new era of strength. But inside the high walls of the Kuja palace, the air was different. It was stitched together with secrets. Naruto was now 5 years old. To the world, he did not exist. To the palace guards, he was a ghost, or a stray cat, that occasionally caused the floorboards to creak in the middle of the night. Stay low, Naruto, Sonia whispered, her voice strained. They were in the massive library of the palace, a place filled with ancient scrolls and the scent of aging parchment. Naruto was crouched under a heavy mahogany table, his small hands gripped around a wooden practice dagger Sonia had carved for him. The guards are changing shifts, she continued, looking toward the heavy oak doors. If you make a sound, the game is over. Naruto nodded, his blue eyes wide and intense. He didn't call it a game. In his head, he knew what over meant. It meant the men in white masks with the cold eyes would come back. It meant the branding iron. He stayed so still that even his shadow seemed to freeze. Since he was 3, the sisters had turned his existence into a series of drills. Rule 1. Never speak above a whisper. Rule 2. Never stand near an open window. Rule 3. If you see a shadow that isn't a sister, vanish. Hancock entered the library, her red robes trailing behind her like a wake of blood. She was taller now, her beauty becoming a weapon that she used to shield the island. But when she saw Naruto under the table, her face softened into something human. Sonia, Hancock said, her voice commanding. Has he eaten? Only some fruit, Sonia replied. He refused the meat. He said it makes too much noise to chew. Hancock's heart twinged. A 5-year-old child should be loud. He should be running through the jungle, scraping his knees, and shouting at the birds. Instead, Naruto had become a master of silence. He was a predator in a nursery. Come here, Naruto, Hancock commanded gently. The boy slid out from under the table. He moved with a strange, fluid grace, a mixture of the Kuja's martial elegance and the desperate stealth of a runaway. He didn't walk, he drifted. He reached Hancock and looked up. He was small for his age, his blonde hair shorn short by Mary's shears to keep it from snagging on things. I was a stone, Naruto said, his voice raspy from disuse. You were a very good stone, Hancock murmured, kneeling to stroke his hair. But today, we begin something else. You are getting faster. Your heart beats louder when you run. The guards, they have the hockey. They can feel presence. If you don't learn to mask your spirit, they will find you through the walls. Naruto tilted his head. Hockey. The power of will, Hancock explained. She looked at Sonia and Mari, who had joined them. We cannot keep him in a cage forever. If he is to live in the shadows, he must be the strongest shadow. She pulled out a blindfold. From now on, we play a new game, Hancock said, her eyes flashing with a bit of the Empress's steel. I will try to find you in this room using only my mind. If I touch you, you lose. You must learn to make your will disappear. Hide, my soul? Naruto asked, struggling with the concept. Yes, Hancock whispered. Make the world believe you aren't there. For the next 6 months, the palace became a training ground. While the Kuja pirates were out raiding the seas, the palace interior was a battlefield of spirit. Naruto learned that if he closed his eyes and thought of the cold, dark void of the slave pits, his presence dimmed. It was a sad way to learn, but it was effective. He began to perceive the colors of the sisters' spirits. Hancock's was a towering, golden flame, Sonia's was a sturdy green forest, Mary's was a warm, yellow hearth. But one afternoon, the secret almost broke. A young warrior, a novice named Ran, had been assigned to bring fresh linens to the Empress's chambers. She was clumsy and eager, arriving 10 minutes before the scheduled shift change. Naruto was in the hallway, practicing his silent footwork. The door creaked open. Ran stepped in, humming a Kuja war song. Naruto froze. He was 10 feet away from her, in the middle of a hallway with no cover. Ran stopped. She sniffed the air. Is someone there? She asked, her hand moving to the hilt of her sword. She felt something. A ripple in the air. A presence that didn't belong. Naruto's heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. Stone. I am a stone. I am the dark. I am nothing. He squeezed his eyes shut, pushing every ounce of his being into the floor. Ran walked forward, her eyes narrowing. She passed right by him, so close her sleeve brushed his nose. She stopped, looking at the empty space where Naruto stood. She looked confused, rubbing the back of her neck. Must be the heat, she muttered, shaking her head and continuing toward the laundry bin. In the shadows of the doorway, Hancock watched, her hand gripping her fan so hard the wood groaned. She had been ready to strike the girl down to protect the secret. When Ran left, Naruto collapsed, gasping for air. His face was pale, drenched in sweat. Hancock rushed to him, picking him up. You did it, she whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of pride and horror. She looked right at you, and she saw nothing. Naruto looked at his hands. He was shivering. Hank, why do I have to be nothing? The question hung in the air, unanswered. Hancock held him tighter, staring at the closed door. She realized then that they weren't just hiding a boy. They were raising a ghost. And one day, a ghost would want to scream. Chapter 2. The Whispering Palace. 3 years passed like a held breath. In the sun-drenched markets of Amazon Lily, the Kuja sang of their beautiful snake princess. They spoke of the 3 sisters who had escaped the clutches of the world nobles, and returned to lead their nation into a new era of strength. But inside the high walls of the Kuja palace, the air was different. It was stitched together with secrets. Naruto was now 5 years old. To the world, he did not exist. To the palace guards, he was a ghost, or a stray cat, that occasionally caused the floorboards to creak in the middle of the night. Stay low, Naruto, Sonia whispered, her voice strained. They were in the massive library of the palace, a place filled with ancient scrolls and the scent of aging parchment. Naruto was crouched under a heavy mahogany table, his small hands gripped around a wooden practice dagger Sonia had carved for him. The guards are changing shifts, she continued, looking toward the heavy oak doors. If you make a sound, the game is over. Naruto nodded, his blue eyes wide and intense. He didn't call it a game. In his head, he knew what over meant. It meant the men in white masks with the cold eyes would come back. It meant the branding iron. He stayed so still that even his shadow seemed to freeze. Since he was 3, the sisters had turned his existence into a series of drills. Rule 1. Never speak above a whisper. Rule 2. Never stand near an open window. Rule 3. If you see a shadow that isn't a sister, vanish. Hancock entered the library, her red robes trailing behind her like a wake of blood. She was taller now, her beauty becoming a weapon that she used to shield the island. But when she saw Naruto under the table, her face softened into something human. Sonia, Hancock said, her voice commanding. Has he eaten? Only some fruit, Sonia replied. He refused the meat. He said it makes too much noise to chew. Hancock's heart twinged. A 5-year-old child should be loud. He should be running through the jungle, scraping his knees, and shouting at the birds. Instead, Naruto had become a master of silence. He was a predator in a nursery. Come here, Naruto, Hancock commanded gently. The boy slid out from under the table. He moved with a strange, fluid grace, a mixture of the Kuja's martial elegance and the desperate stealth of a runaway. He didn't walk, he drifted. He reached Hancock and looked up. He was small for his age, his blonde hair shorn short by Mary's shears to keep it from snagging on things. I was a stone, Naruto said, his voice raspy from disuse. You were a very good stone, Hancock murmured, kneeling to stroke his hair. But today, we begin something else. You are getting faster. Your heart beats louder when you run. The guards, they have the hockey. They can feel presence. If you don't learn to mask your spirit, they will find you through the walls. Naruto tilted his head. Hockey. The power of will, Hancock explained. She looked at Sonia and Mari, who had joined them. We cannot keep him in a cage forever. If he is to live in the shadows, he must be the strongest shadow. She pulled out a blindfold. From now on, we play a new game, Hancock said, her eyes flashing with a bit of the Empress's steel. I will try to find you in this room using only my mind. If I touch you, you lose. You must learn to make your will disappear. Hide, my soul, Naruto asked, struggling with the concept. Yes, Hancock whispered. Make the world believe you aren't there. For the next 6 months, the palace became a training ground. While the Kuja pirates were out raiding the seas, the palace interior was a battlefield of spirit. Naruto learned that if he closed his eyes and thought of the cold, dark void of the slave pits, his presence dimmed. It was a sad way to learn, but it was effective. He began to perceive the colors of the sisters' spirits. Hancock's was a towering, golden flame, Sonia's was a sturdy green forest, Mary's was a warm, yellow hearth. But one afternoon, the secret almost broke. A young warrior, a novice named Ran, had been assigned to bring fresh linens to the Empress's chambers. She was clumsy and eager, arriving 10 minutes before the scheduled shift change. Naruto was in the hallway, practicing his silent footwork. The door creaked open. Ran stepped in, humming a Kuja war song. Naruto froze. He was 10 feet away from her, in the middle of a hallway with no cover. Ran stopped. She sniffed the air. Is someone there? She asked, her hand moving to the hilt of her sword. She felt something. A ripple in the air. A presence that didn't belong. Naruto's heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. Stone. I am a stone. I am the dark. I am nothing. He squeezed his eyes shut, pushing every ounce of his being into the floor. Ran walked forward, her eyes narrowing. She passed right by him, so close her sleeve brushed his nose. She stopped, looking at the empty space where Naruto stood. She looked confused, rubbing the back of her neck. Must be the heat, she muttered, shaking her head and continuing toward the laundry bin. In the shadows of the doorway, Hancock watched, her hand gripping her fan so hard the wood groaned. She had been ready to strike the girl down to protect the secret. When Ran left, Naruto collapsed, gasping for air. His face was pale, drenched in sweat. Hancock rushed to him, picking him up. You did it, she whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of pride and horror. She looked right at you, and she saw nothing. Naruto looked at his hands. He was shivering. Hank, why do I have to be nothing? The question hung in the air, unanswered. Hancock held him tighter, staring at the closed door. She realized then that they weren't just hiding a boy. They were raising a ghost. And one day, a ghost would want to scream. Chapter 3. The Iron Horizon. Naruto was 8, and for the first time in his life, he felt the island tremble. It wasn't an earthquake. It was the color of observation, the Kanbunshoku haki, that he had been forced to develop in the dark. To Naruto, the world was no longer just shapes and sounds, it was a sea of intentions. And today, the sea was filled with the smell of iron and cold, bureaucratic malice. A marine ship, Hancock spat, standing before the floor-to-ceiling mirror as Sonia fastened her heavy gold earrings. Vice Admiral Momonga, he dares to anchor in our waters without an invitation. The world government is getting restless, sister, Sonia warned. They want to ensure the Snake Princess is still loyal to the warlord agreement. They want to see your face. Naruto sat in his usual spot, a hollowed-out space behind a massive tapestry depicting the history of the Kuja. He peered through a tiny gap in the weaving. He was taller now, his limbs lean and wiry. His blue eyes, once filled with the raw terror of a slave, had sharpened into something calculating. He wore a simple, dark tunic that allowed him to blend into the shadows of the stone walls. The boy, Hancock said, her voice dropping an octave as she looked toward the tapestry. Naruto stepped out silently. He didn't make a sound on the stone floor. He was no longer just a stone, he was a smudge in the peripheral vision of the world. I know, Naruto said. His voice was no longer raspy, but it was quiet, modulated to carry no further than the person he was speaking to. The man on the ship. He feels like a graveyard. Cold, sharp. Hancock's eyes softened for a fleeting second. That is Momonga. He is a man of duty. He will search the palace with his senses. Even if his feet do not enter these rooms, his mind will. She walked over to him and handed him a small, carved wooden mask, a kitsune fox face with narrow slits for eyes. It was a gift Mari had made to help him feel hidden, even when he wasn't. You must go to the lower vaults, Hancock commanded. Deep beneath the serpent's roots. There are tunnels there that lead to the sea caves. Do not come up until the sun sets twice. Do you understand? 2 suns, Naruto repeated. He adjusted the mask. The wooden surface felt cool against his skin. But Hank, what if they hurt you? Hancock let out a short, sharp laugh, the sound of a queen who knew her worth. They cannot hurt me, Naruto. I am beautiful. The world forgives me everything because of it. But you, the world will not forgive your existence. Run. Now. Naruto didn't argue. He turned and vanished into a secret panel in the wall. As he descended into the damp, dark bowels of the palace, he could hear the distant blowing of horns. The Marines had landed. The lower vaults were ancient and smelled of wet earth and old snakes. Naruto moved through them with the ease of a creature born to the dark. But as he reached the sea caves, he felt a sudden, jarring spike of presence. Someone was already there. Naruto pressed his back against the jagged limestone wall. He slowed his heart rate, a technique Mari had taught him using rhythmic breathing. Around the corner, near a hidden exit that spilled out into the rocky cliffs of the coast, stood a Marine scout. She was young, barely 20, and had likely been sent to scout for hidden ports, or contraband. She was looking right at the tunnel Naruto needed to cross. Naruto's hand went to the small pouch at his belt. Inside were smoke pellets he had made from dried jungle fungi. He couldn't kill her, that would bring the wrath of the Navy down on the island. He had to be a ghost. But then, the girl did something unexpected. She sat down, pulled out a small locket, and began to cry. I hate this place, she whispered to the empty cave. It's so hot, and everyone is so scary. I just want to go back to the base. Naruto watched her. He felt her spirit. It wasn't like the graveyard of the Vice Admiral. It was watery, weak, filled with the same loneliness he felt every time the sisters left for a raid. For a moment, Naruto forgot Rule 1. He forgot he was a secret. He saw a human being, and for the first time in 8 years, he wanted to be seen. He shifted his weight. A small pebble skittered across the floor. Clack. The Marine scout froze. She wiped her eyes and stood up, drawing her pistol. Who's there? Show yourself. Naruto stayed in the shadows, his kitsune mask glowing faintly in the dim bioluminescence of the cave. He didn't move. He became the stone. I saw you. The girl shouted, her voice trembling. She fired a shot, not at him, but into the darkness of the ceiling to scare him out. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. Mistake, Naruto thought. The echoes. Within seconds, the heavy footsteps of Kuja guards echoed from the upper tunnels. They had heard the shot. Marine. A harsh voice yelled. It was Ran, the warrior who had almost found him years ago. What are you doing in the forbidden vaults? The Marine girl panicked. There's someone else here. A kid. I saw a mask. Naruto's blood ran cold. He didn't think. He used the distraction. As Ran and 3 other warriors rounded the corner to confront the Marine, Naruto threw a smoke pellet at his own feet. Poof. Under the cover of the thick, purple haze, he didn't run away. He ran at them. He dived between Ran's legs, tumbled over a rock, and scrambled up a vertical chimney in the cave ceiling that even the Kuja didn't know about. He hung there, suspended by his fingernails and toes in the pitch-black crevice, looking down. There is no one here but you, Marine, Ran growled, pinning the girl against the wall. You are hallucinating from the heat. These vaults are empty. I saw a mask. A fox. The girl sobbed. Ran looked around the empty, smoky cave. Her haki flared, searching. Naruto held his breath until his lungs burned, pulling every bit of his will into a tiny, frozen point in his chest. Ran's gaze passed over the chimney. She paused. She felt a flicker, a tiny spark of something. But then, the Marine girl kicked her, and the distraction was complete. Take her to the Empress, Ran commanded. Let the Snake Princess deal with this trespasser. As they dragged the girl away, Naruto stayed in the ceiling for hours. He didn't move until his muscles screamed. When he finally climbed down, the sun had set. He walked to the edge of the sea cave and looked out at the massive marine warship anchored in the distance. He took off his kitsune mask. His face was covered in soot and sweat. He realized then that the stone wasn't enough anymore. The world was coming for Amazon Lily, and nothing couldn't fight back. I need to be more than a shadow, Naruto whispered to the crashing waves. That night, when he finally crept back into the palace, he didn't go to his bed. He went to Hancock's room. She was sitting on her throne, looking exhausted and regal. The Marine is gone, she said without looking at him. I turned her to stone and then, mercifully, freed her once Momonga apologized for her insanity. She told him she saw a ghost. I'm sorry, Hank, Naruto said, kneeling at her feet. Hancock looked down at him. She saw the soot on his face and the new, hard glint in his eyes. Don't be sorry, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Be stronger. If you are seen again, I might not be able to turn the world to stone fast enough to save you. Naruto nodded. He understood. The game was over. The war for his existence had begun. Chapter 4. The Weaving of the Breath. By the age of 12, Naruto had become a master of the palace's anatomy. He knew which stones held heat, which vents carried whispers from the throne room, and which shadows were deep enough to hide a boy who was fast outgrowing his childhood hiding spots. But a new problem had emerged. Naruto was no longer just hiding. He was vibrating. Your spirit is too loud, Naruto, Mari sighed, wiping sweat from her brow. They were in a hidden courtyard, a small patch of green shielded by 4 high walls and a canopy of thick vines. Even when you're still, I can feel you. It's like standing next to a lightning storm. Naruto stood in the center of the yard, his eyes closed. He was shirtless, showing the lean, corded muscle of a boy who spent his nights climbing palace spires. I'm trying, Mari, he grunted. But the haki, it only wants to go out. It wants to harden my skin or sense the birds. I want it to stay inside. Haki is willpower, Sonia added, leaning against a pillar. It is a weapon. It is not meant to be a companion. Naruto frowned. He didn't agree. To him, the energy inside him felt like a river. If he just let it flow, it wasted away. But what if he could dam it? What if he could twist it? That night, alone in the lower vaults, Naruto sat in total darkness. He began to experiment with his breathing, not the slow, rhythmic breath of a stone, but a rapid, focused intake of air. He pictured the energy not as a shroud of haki, but as a coil. He pressed his palms together. It was a gesture born of instinct, a desperate need to ground his energy. Focus. Twist. Mold. Suddenly, the air in the vault grew cold. A swirl of blue-white light flickered between his palms, tiny sparks of pure, unrefined energy. It wasn't haki. It was something more primal, the union of his physical vitality and his mental will. What is this? He whispered. He pushed the energy toward his feet. In an instant, he wasn't just fast, he was gone. He blurred across the room so quickly he hit the far wall before he could blink. Crack. The sound echoed through the tunnels. Naruto groaned, rubbing his shoulder, but a manic grin spread across his face. He had found a way to use his will to rewrite the rules of his own body. He began to call it the weaving. Over the next few months, Naruto became a laboratory of one. Since he had no teachers for this strange new power, he stole scrolls from the library, ancient texts about the life return, Seimei Kiken, and the flow of energy in the body. He combined them with his own observations. He learned that by focusing the weaving into his hands, he could stick to the ceiling like a gecko without using a single finger hold. He learned that by spinning the energy in his core, he could move without making a sound, even on dry leaves. But the most dangerous discovery came when he was 13. Hancock had returned from a long voyage, her mood foul. A celestial dragon had sent a demand for more tribute from the Kuja, and the reminder of her past had sent her into a spiral of silent rage. She was sitting in her gardens, her haki so oppressive that the nearby flowers were wilting. Naruto approached her. He didn't hide. He walked openly across the grass. Stay back, Naruto, Hancock warned, her eyes flashing. My spirit is not stable today. You will get hurt. I won't, Naruto said. He closed his eyes. He performed a series of rapid hand movements, gestures he had invented to help him focus his weaving. Bird, ram, serpent. He exhaled, and a visible ripple of energy settled over him. When Hancock's oppressive haki hit him, it didn't crush him. It flowed around him, like water around a smooth stone in a river. Hancock stood up, her jaw dropping. You are nullifying my presence. Not nullifying, Naruto said, his voice straining with the effort. Just moving out of the way. I call it the hush step style. Hancock walked toward him, her long dress rustling. She reached out and touched his cheek. He was glowing, a faint, ethereal blue. You are not a Kuja, she whispered, a realization dawning on her. And you are not a marine. You are creating something entirely new, aren't you? I have to, Naruto replied, looking her in the eye. If I'm going to be a shadow, I might as well be the most dangerous shadow in the world. So that when the dragons come for you, I can erase them before they even see my face. Hancock felt a shiver run down her spine. It wasn't fear, it was awe. She realized that the boy she had hidden in a basket was no longer just a cub. He was becoming a myth. But the piece of their secret was about to shatter. Far away, at Marine headquarters, a report reached the desk of an admiral. It was a dusty, ignored file from a scout who had been turned to stone years ago. It mentioned a fox-masked ghost in the vaults of Amazon Lily. And for the first time, the world government began to wonder if the Snake Princess was hiding more than just her past. Small communication shell, tone dial, he kept on his wrist. The Western Wall. Someone just bypassed the serpent sensors. Impossible. Hancock's voice came back, sharp and icy. The guards would have screamed. They didn't scream because they didn't see him, Naruto replied, pulling his kitsune mask over his face. I'm moving. He didn't use the stairs. He stepped off the spire, falling hundreds of feet into the darkness. Just before hitting the ground, he channeled the weaving into his soles, sticking to the vertical surface of the palace wall and sprinting down it at a 90-degree angle. He reached the western corridor just as a shadow flickered through the window. The intruder was a tall man in a dark suit, his eyes obscured by round sunglasses. He held a small, high-tech camera and a vial of blood, likely taken from a drugged guard. CP9. The world government's secret assassins. The agent, a man named Lucius, stopped. He adjusted his glasses, sniffing the air. I was told this island was only women, he muttered to himself. But the scent of testosterone is faint, yet unmistakably here. You have a big nose for a dead man, a voice whispered from the ceiling. Lucius looked up, but there was nothing. Suddenly, a blur of motion struck from his blind spot. Hush step. Gale kick. Naruto's leg, reinforced with the weaving and a thin coating of armament hockey, slammed into Lucius's side. The agent gasped, his Tekai iron body, barely absorbing the blow as he was sent crashing through a decorative screen. Lucius tumbled, recovered instantly, and stood in a combat stance. He looked at the boy in the fox mask. A child, so the rumors were true. The snake princess is harboring a male. A survivor of Mary Geoise. He grinned, a cruel, jagged thing. The dragons will pay handsomely for your head, boy. Or perhaps they'll just take your eyes. You won't live long enough to collect, Naruto said. Lucius moved. Shigen. Finger pistol. His hand became a blur, his finger stabbing toward Naruto's throat with the speed of a bullet. Naruto didn't retreat. He tilted his head by a fraction of an inch, a move he had practiced 10,000 times with Sonya. The finger grazed his mask, snapping a piece of the wood. Naruto grabbed Lucius's wrist. The agent's eyes widened. No one caught a CP9 agent mid-attack. My turn, Naruto growled. He didn't just punch. He used the weaving to spiral his energy into his fist, creating a vacuum effect. Twin serpent strike. His fist hit Lucius's chest. The first impact broke the Tekai. The second impact, the echo of his energy, sent a shockwave through the agent's internal organs. Lucius coughed up blood, staggering back. What kind of hockey is this? It's unstable. It's not hockey, Naruto said, his voice cold. It's my life. The agent realized he was outmatched in close quarters. He leapt back, preparing to use Rankyaku, Tempest Kick, to level the entire hallway. If I cannot take you alive, I will leave your corpse for the Empress to weep over. He swung his leg, sending a lethal blade of compressed air toward Naruto. But Naruto didn't dodge. He clapped his hands together. Weaving. Hidden mist. He released a massive burst of energy that flash froze the humidity in the air, creating a dense, impenetrable fog in a split second. The air blade sailed harmlessly through the mist, shattering a stone pillar. Lucius panicked. He couldn't see. He couldn't hear. Even his trained senses were muffled by the frequency of Naruto's energy. Then, he felt a cold hand on his shoulder. Rule 4, Naruto's voice whispered in his ear. If the world sees you, make sure it's the last thing they see. A flash of blue light illuminated the fog. When the mist cleared, Hancock, Sonya, and Mari burst into the hallway, their weapons drawn and their hockey flared to the limit. They stopped dead. The CP9 agent was slumped against the wall, unconscious, his suit shredded and his body glowing with dying embers of blue energy. Naruto was standing over him, his mask broken in half, revealing one fierce, sapphire eye. He was trembling, his hands scorched from the intensity of his own power. Naruto! Mari cried, rushing to him. Hancock looked at the agent, then at the camera lying on the floor. She crushed the device under her heel, her face a mask of fury. The secret is out, Sonya whispered, her voice shaking. If he doesn't report back, they will send a fleet. Hancock walked over to Naruto. She didn't scold him. She didn't tell him to hide. She saw the blood on his knuckles and the way he stood, no longer a shadow, but a guardian. Let them come, Hancock said, her voice echoing through the palace. We are no longer hiding a boy. We are preparing a king for war. Naruto looked at his sisters. For the first time, he didn't feel like a mistake. I'm not going back to the cage, Naruto said, his voice steady. And I won't let them take you back either. Ever. Outside, the storm broke, but the piece of Amazon lily was gone forever. Chapter 6. The Shadow's Declaration. The air in Amazon lily had changed. The fragrant scent of tropical flowers was now masked by the metallic tang of blood and the ozone-heavy scent of Naruto's unrefined energy. Lucius, the CP9 agent, lay slumped against the marble wall of the palace. His iron body technique had been shattered from the inside out. Even as he drifted in and out of consciousness, his skin flickered with faint, static-like blue sparks, the lingering residue of Naruto's weaving. The weight of a mask. Naruto stood in the center of the hallway, his breathing heavy and ragged. His kitsune mask lay in two pieces on the floor. For the first time in years, the palace guards, the Kuja warriors who had rushed to the scene, saw his face clearly. He wasn't the soft-featured boy they remembered hiding in the kitchens. His sapphire eyes were cold, sharp, and glowing with an inner light that shouldn't belong to a human. Naruto, Margaret whispered, stepping forward from the ranks of the guards. She reached out, but stopped. The ground around Naruto was scorched. Don't touch the energy, Naruto warned, his voice rasping. It's still discharging. The Empress's wrath. Hancock walked through the crowd, her heels clicking like rhythmic thunder on the stone floor. She looked at the ruined agent, then at the broken camera, and finally at Naruto. Sonia, Mari, Hancock commanded, her voice vibrating with hockey. Take this filth to the deepest cell in the mountain. If he speaks a single word of what he saw, cut out his tongue. If he tries to escape, break his legs. And the boy, sister? Sonia asked, looking at Naruto with a mixture of pride and deep concern. Hancock didn't answer immediately. She walked up to Naruto and placed a hand on his shoulder. The weaving energy bit at her palm, stinging her skin, but she didn't flinch. He is no longer the boy, Hancock declared, loud enough for every warrior in the hall to hear. He is the first shield of the Kuja. He is the ghost of Amazon Lily. The world government stirs. While the Kuja prepared for the fallout, the ripples of the encounter reached the outside world. At a marine outpost near the comm belt, a high-ranking officer stared at a blank monitor. Status on Agent Lucius. The officer barked. Signal lost, sir. But the last burst of data we received wasn't a photo, it was a frequency reading. The energy levels recorded on Amazon Lily don't match hockey, devil fruits, or even the Minx Electro. A shadow fell over the desk. A tall man with a white suit and a bird perched on his shoulder, Rob Lucci, stepped into the light. A new power, Lucci murmured, his voice like grinding velvet. If the Snake Princess is breeding a weapon, we don't just report it. We erase it. The evolution. Vibration step. Back on the island, Naruto knew his time was running out. He retreated to the hidden waterfall where he had first felt the breath. He realized that the weaving was too taxing on his muscles. He needed to make it more efficient. He sat under the crushing weight of the waterfall. Instead of fighting the water, he tried to weave his energy to match the frequency of the falling stream. Focus. Twist. Vibrate. Suddenly, his body began to hum. He wasn't just standing there, he was vibrating at such a high speed that the water simply passed through him as if he were a ghost. Hush step. Phase shift, he whispered. He reached out and touched a solid rock. Instead of punching it, he sent a high-frequency vibration through it. A second later, the massive boulder didn't break, it turned into fine, white sand. The storm arrives. The piece was shattered 3 days later. A horn sounded from the watchtower, a sound not heard in Amazon Lily for a generation. On the horizon, the sea wasn't blue anymore. It was gray. 5 marine battleships, led by a vessel with a distinctive cat figurehead, were cutting through the comm belt, ignoring the Sea Kings. Naruto stood on the cliffs, his new mask, now reinforced with black iron, strapped tightly to his face. He felt the cold, murderous intent of the CP9 elite approaching. They're here for the secret, Naruto said to the wind. He tightened his fist, and the air around him began to warp. But all they're going to find is a grave. Chapter 7. The Shattered Calm. The sky over Amazon Lily turned a bruised purple as the 5 marine battleships dropped anchor just outside the reef. These weren't standard scout ships, they were reinforced vessels designed for a siege. At the center of the fleet sat the flagship of CP-9, its presence a silent death warrant. On the shore, the Kuja pirates stood in formation, their bows drawn, arrows tipped with hockey-infused flint. But for the first time in history, they weren't the first line of defense. The ghost on the water. Before the marine landing boats could even touch the sand, a blur of blue light ignited atop the highest sea stack. Target sighted, a marine sniper whispered through his scope. It's a kid, wearing a mask. Naruto didn't wait for an invitation. He leapt. Instead of falling into the ocean, he used the weaving to vibrate the soles of his feet against the air itself, creating temporary platforms of solidified pressure. To the Marines, it looked like he was walking on the wind. Hush step. Sky splitter. Naruto descended like a meteor. He slammed into the deck of the lead scout ship. The impact wasn't a physical explosion, but a vibrational wave. The wooden deck didn't splinter, it disintegrated into sawdust. The Marines standing nearby collapsed instantly, their equilibrium shattered by the frequency of Naruto's landing. The leopard's shadow. From the flagship, a tall figure watched the chaos. Rob Lucci adjusted his tie, his cold eyes tracking Naruto's movements with predatory precision. That isn't a devil fruit, Lucci noted, his voice devoid of emotion. He is manipulating the kinetic energy of his own cells. Fascinating. And dangerous. Lucci didn't send more foot soldiers. He knew they were just fodder. He turned to the woman beside him. Khalifa, signal the cannons. Aim for the palace, not the boy. Let's see how he handles a choice. The burden of a guardian. Boom. The first volley of cannonballs soared over Naruto's head, trailing smoke as they arched toward the Kuja palace where Hancock and the civilians were gathered. No. Naruto roared. He kicked off the sinking scout ship, his body glowing a fierce, unstable violet. He knew he couldn't reach the palace in time to stop the shells manually. He had to use the technique he had been terrified to try, the one that had turned the boulder to dust. He clapped his hands, focusing every ounce of his willpower into a single point in front of his chest. Weaving. Resonance dome. He threw his hands outward. A massive, translucent sphere of vibrating energy expanded from his body, growing until it covered the path of the incoming shells. When the cannonballs hit the dome, they didn't explode. The vibration matched their velocity and cancelled it, turning the heavy iron spheres into harmless metallic rain that fell into the sea. The cost of power. Naruto fell to one knee on the surface of the water, coughing up blood. His skin was beginning to tear. The weaving was a double-edged sword that ate away at the user's muscles if pushed too far. You're wide open, a voice whispered. Before Naruto could react, a finger tipped with deadly force plunged into his shoulder. Shigen. Finger pistol. Naruto gasped as he was blown backward, skipping across the waves like a stone. He corrected his balance just in time to see Rob Lucci standing on the surface of the water, his coat fluttering in the sea breeze. You have a gift, boy, Lucci said, his hand already transforming into a fur-covered claw as his zone fruit activated. But a shadow cannot survive the sun. The world government has decided you are an anomaly that must be purged. Naruto wiped the blood from his mouth and stood up, his sapphire eye burning behind the iron mask. I'm not an anomaly, Naruto growled, the blue light around his fists beginning to spiral into a lethal drill-like shape. I'm the reason you're never going home. Chapter 8. The Leopard and the Ghost. The ocean surface became a battlefield of physics. On one side stood Rob Lucci, his body expanding into his hybrid leopard form, his muscles rippling with predatory grace. On the other, Naruto, his breathing jagged, his body wreathed in a flickering, unstable shroud of blue-white energy. The marine ships had ceased fire. The soldiers watched from the decks in terrified silence. They knew they were witnessing a clash between two monsters. The speed of sound. Lucci didn't speak. He vanished. Soru. He reappeared instantly in Naruto's blind spot, his claws aimed at the boy's neck. But Naruto didn't turn around. He leaned forward, his body vibrating so fast that Lucci's claws passed through a shimmering afterimage. Hush step. Afterimage. Naruto slid underneath Lucci's guard, his fist glowing with a concentrated spiral of weaving. Twin serpent. Internal burst. He slammed his fist into Lucci's stomach. The impact sent a visible shockwave through the leopard man's back, but Lucci didn't fly away. He had used Tekai Iron Body at the moment of impact. Lucci coughed a spray of blood but gripped Naruto's arm with a clawed hand. Impressive. You bypassed the skin, but my internal organs are reinforced by my zone strength. You'll have to do better. The Rokuogan versus the weaving. Lucci pulled Naruto close and placed both fists against the boy's chest. You aren't the only one who can use shockwaves, boy. Rokuogan. 6 King Pistol. A massive blast of pure physical pressure erupted from Lucci's fists. Naruto was sent flying across the water, his iron mask shattering completely. He skipped 3 times over the waves before slamming into a sea stack with enough force to crack the stone. Inside the palace, Hancock gripped the railing so hard the stone turned to dust. Naruto, stand up, she screamed, her heart racing. The awakening of the core. Naruto slumped against the rock, his vision blurring. His weaving was failing. His muscles felt like they were filled with molten lead. He looked at his hands, they were trembling. I'm too weak, he thought. I'm just a boy playing at being a king. Then, he felt it. Not the weaving of his muscles, but the breath of the island itself. He remembered the stones that held heat and the vents that carried whispers. He realized he had been trying to create energy, when he should have been borrowing it. He closed his eyes. He stopped fighting the pain. He opened his gates. Suddenly, the blue light turned a deep, blinding azure. The water around him didn't just ripple, it began to boil. The final exchange. Lucci sensed the change and felt a rare emotion, fear. He leapt into the air, spinning like a saw blade. Rankyaku. Gaicho. Tempest Kick. Victory Bird. A massive bird-shaped blade of air, large enough to split a battleship, raced toward Naruto. Naruto stood up. He didn't dodge. He held out one hand. Weaving. Absolute 0 point. As the air blade hit his hand, the vibration stopped. Everything stopped. The kinetic energy of the attack was absorbed into Naruto's palm, neutralized instantly. Naruto moved. He wasn't using Soru or Hush Step. He was simply there, in front of Lucci, before the leopard man could even blink. This is for the sisters you tried to take, Naruto whispered. He struck. Not with a fist, but with a single finger pressed against Lucci's forehead. Weaving. Infinite echo. The energy Naruto had absorbed from the cannonballs, the air blade, and Lucci's own Rokuogan was unleashed all at once into a single point. Lucci's eyes rolled back. A silent ripple traveled through his entire body, and he was launched backward with such velocity that he pierced through 2 marine battleships before sinking into the dark depths of the ocean. The aftermath. Silence returned to the calm belt. The remaining 3 marine ships began to retreat in a panic, their leader defeated by a child. Naruto stood on the water, his hair white from the strain, his sapphire eyes staring at the retreating fleet. He didn't celebrate. He turned back toward the palace, saw Hancock waiting on the shore, and finally let his legs give out. As he began to sink into the sea, a pair of warm, strong arms caught him. You did it, Naruto, Hancock whispered, pulling him to her chest. The world knows now. The shadow has become the sun. Chapter 9. The Bounty of the Nameless. The defeat of a CP9 elite didn't bring the peace the Kuja had hoped for. Instead, it was like throwing a boulder into a silent lake. The ripples reached the very top of the world, the holy land of Mary Geoise. For the first time in history, the world government was forced to acknowledge a power that didn't come from a devil fruit or standard hockey. They called it the frequency threat. The awakening. Naruto woke up 3 days later in the palace's infirmary. His body was wrapped in medicinal herbs and bandages, but his hair, once a vibrant blonde, now had streaks of permanent white, a reminder of the infinite echo he had unleashed. Hancock was sitting by his bed, staring at a piece of paper that had been delivered by a news coup that morning. Am I in trouble? Naruto rasped, his voice dry. Hancock didn't look up at first. Then, she slid the paper onto his lap. It was a wanted poster. There was no photo, only a sketch of his broken iron mask and a pair of piercing sapphire eyes. The name at the bottom read: The Ghost of Amazon Lily. Bounty: 350 million berries. Dead or alive: 350 million. Naruto choked. For a first bounty. You didn't just defeat an agent, Naruto, Hancock said, her voice a mix of pride and fear. You humiliated the world government. You stopped a Buster Call single-handedly. They are terrified of what you represent, a power they cannot control. The Council of Sisters. Later that evening, Naruto sat with Hancock, Sonia, and Mari in the private gardens. The atmosphere was heavy. The Marines will come back, Sonia said, pointing to a map of the Grand Line. Next time, it won't be CP9. It will be an admiral. Or worse, the Seraphim. I have to leave, Naruto said quietly. The garden went silent. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. No, Mari cried. You're safe here. We can hide you in the vaults again. Mari-san. Naruto looked at her, his expression mature beyond his years. I stayed in the vaults to protect myself. But if I stay now, I bring the war to your doorstep. As long as I am here, every woman on this island is a target for the government's rage. Hancock closed her eyes. She knew he was right. She had seen what happens when the celestial dragons focus their hate on a single spot. The departure. At midnight, a small, sleek ship, built by the Kuja's best carpenters and reinforced with the same metal as Naruto's mask, was docked at the hidden cove. Naruto stood on the pier, wearing a dark cloak and a new, more refined mask. He carried a small bag of supplies and a communication snail linked directly to Hancock's private line. Where will you go? Hancock asked. She was standing tall, maintaining her empress persona, but her eyes were shimmering. I need to understand this, weaving, Naruto replied. I felt something when I touched the air during the fight. A resonance. There are others out there who might know more about the breath of all things. I'm going to find them. He stepped onto the boat, but before he could cast off, Margaret ran down the pier and threw a small bundle at him. It's a log pose, she shouted. It points toward the island of Water 7. If you're going to be a pirate, you'll need a real ship eventually. The open sea. As the small vessel drifted into the mists of the calm belt, Naruto looked back one last time. The palace was a silhouette against the moon. He raised his hand in a silent promise. I'll be back. And when I return, no one will ever have to hide again. Naruto turned toward the horizon. He sat at the helm and closed his eyes, feeling the vibration of the ocean beneath him. He began to weave his energy with the rhythm of the waves, the boat suddenly picking up speed as if it were being pushed by the sea itself. Chapter 10. The Resonance of the Blue Station. The calm belt was a graveyard for most, but for Naruto, it was a training ground. Without the protection of Amazon Lily's great serpents, he had to use the weaving to vibrate the hull of his small skiff, creating a frequency that mimicked the apex predators of the deep. The Sea Kings simply ignored him, sensing a ghost rather than a meal. After 5 days of solitude, the mist cleared, and the horizon exploded with the sight of a city rising from the ocean like a mountain of fountains. Water 7. The ghost enters the light. Naruto docked his small craft at the lower piers, far from the bustling blue station where the sea train puffed out clouds of steam. He pulled his cloak tight, his iron-reinforced mask hidden in his pack. For the first time, he was walking among normal people, men, women, and children who didn't know the secrets of the Kuja. The air here was different. It didn't smell of jungle, it smelled of salt, sawdust, and hot metal. Hey, kid, move it or lose a limb, a rough voice shouted. Naruto stepped aside just as a massive Yagara bull swam past, carrying a load of timber. He watched the shipwrights with fascination. Their hammers moved with a rhythm, a pulse. Everything has a frequency, Naruto thought, his sapphire eyes darting from the saws to the cranes. The wood, the steel, the water. If I can learn to weave with the rhythm of a ship, I'll never need a wind to sail. An unexpected encounter. While wandering the back alleys of the Dock Number 1 district, Naruto felt a strange hum in the air. It wasn't the rhythmic tapping of a hammer. It was chaotic, loud, and metallic. He turned a corner and saw a group of thugs, bounty hunters by the look of them, surrounding a tall, flamboyant teenager with blue hair styled into a massive pompadour and a Hawaiian shirt. Give it up, Frankie. One thug sneered. That scrap metal belongs to the Galila company. You're just a junk dealer. Super wrong. The blue-haired teen shouted, striking a pose. This scrap has the soul of a battleship. You guys wouldn't know art if it hit you in the face. The thugs drew their blades. Naruto watched from the shadows. He didn't want to get involved. His bounty was too fresh, his face too dangerous. But then, he felt the intent of the thugs. It was murderous. The hush step intervention. As the lead thug lunged with a rusted cutlass, the air in the alleyway suddenly turned cold. Vibrate. Shift. Strike. Hush step. Ripple palm. Naruto appeared between Frankie and the thug. He didn't punch. He simply tapped the flat of the cutlass with 2 fingers. A high-frequency vibration traveled through the blade, causing it to shatter into 1,000 tiny shards before it could touch Frankie's skin. The thugs froze. They looked at the blonde boy with the white-streaked hair. He wasn't wearing his mask, but his eyes were enough to make their blood run cold. Leave, Naruto said, his voice a low vibration that made the thugs' teeth ache. Before I match your heartbeats to the sound of that hammer over there. Terrified by the unnatural pressure, the thugs scrambled away, leaving their broken weapons behind. The architect and the ghost. Frankie blinked, his sunglasses sliding down his nose. Whoa, that was super. What kind of devil fruit was that? You turned that sword into glitter. It's not a fruit, Naruto replied, turning to leave. It's just breathing. Wait, Frankie shouted, running after him. You're not from around here. You have the look of someone who's seen the end of the world. And that energy, it's the same frequency as the legendary, ancient weapons my master talks about. Naruto stopped dead. Ancient weapons? Yeah, my master, Tom, he's the greatest shipwright in the world. He says everything in the world has a voice. You don't just use energy, kid. You're speaking to the world. Frankie grinned, pointing toward a giant bridge in the distance. If you want to learn how to truly build something that can carry that power of yours, you should come to Tom's Workers. We don't care if you're a ghost or a god, as long as you do it with a dawn. The new path. Naruto looked at the wanted poster in his pocket, then at the grinning cyborg to be. For the first time since leaving Amazon Lily, he felt a resonance that wasn't born of war. But in the shadows of the upper city, a pair of binoculars followed them. A government agent in a black suit whispered into a Den Mu. Target identified. The ghost has reached Water 7. He is in contact with the apprentices of the man who holds the blueprints for Pluton. Awaiting orders. Chapter 11. The Voice of the Steel. The workshop of Tom's Workers sat beneath a massive bridge, smelling of sawdust, wet salt, and the heavy scent of grease. Inside, a giant cowfish fishman with a wide grin and a chest the size of a barrel was lifting a ship's mast as if it were a toothpick. A guest, Frankie. Tom boomed, his laughter echoing like a drum. And a guest who carries the weight of the ocean in his footsteps. Ta ha ha. Naruto stood at the entrance, his senses overwhelmed. Usually, he had to focus to feel the resonance of objects, but here, the entire building was singing. Every tool, every plank of atom wood, and every nail had a distinct, humming voice. The lesson of the dawn. Frankie says you can talk to the world with your hands, Tom said, setting the mask down and looking Naruto in the eye. But your energy is chaotic, boy. You are forcing the world to vibrate at your speed. That is the way of a destroyer, not a creator. Naruto looked at his scarred palms. I use it to protect. To fight. To fight is fine, Tom shouted, striking his anvil with a massive hammer. Clang. But a ship doesn't fight the waves to stay afloat, it moves with them. If you want to master this, weaving, you must stop trying to be the loudest sound in the room. You must become the silence that lets the music play. Tom handed Naruto a small, rusted piece of scrap metal and a hammer. Don't use your strength. Use your weaving. But don't break the rust. Ask the steel to let it go. Do it with a dawn. The deep frequency. For hours, Naruto sat in the corner of the workshop. Every time he tried to channel his energy, the scrap metal shattered. He was too intense, too loud. Stop fighting the metal, Naruto told himself. He closed his eyes and lowered his heart rate until it was almost non-existent. He entered the state of the hush step, but instead of using it to move, he used it to listen. He heard the heartbeat of the city. He heard the sea train in the distance. And finally, he heard the voice of the scrap metal, a slow, deep thrum of ancient iron. He tapped the hammer. Softly. He wove his energy not as a drill, but as a gentle ripple. The rust didn't fly off, it simply dissolved into red mist, leaving behind a piece of steel so polished it reflected the moonlight like a mirror. Ta ha ha, you've found the frequency. Tom cheered. You aren't just a ghost anymore, Naruto. You're becoming a conductor. The shadow in the water. The peace of the workshop was short-lived. Outside, the water of the canal began to churn. Naruto's sapphire eyes snapped open. His sensory weaving picked up multiple heartbeats, cold, mechanical, and precise. They were underwater, breathing through tubes. Tom-san, get back, Naruto whispered, pulling his iron mask from his bag. Crash. The windows of the workshop exploded as harpoons attached to steel cables tore through the walls. Figures in black tactical gear rose from the water. They weren't CP-9, they were CP-7, the Infiltration and Capture Unit. By order of the world government, the lead agent announced, his voice muffled by a diving mask. We are here to seize the blueprints of the Pluton and the high-value anomaly known as Naruto. The Symphony of Destruction. You're in my house now, Frankie yelled, pulling out a giant cannon built into his arm. And nobody messes with Tom's workers. No, Frankie. Let me, Naruto said, stepping forward. He didn't take a combat stance. He simply stood still. As the CP-7 agents fired their steam-powered rifles, Naruto performed a single, fluid movement with his hands. Weaving. Soundless vacuum. He didn't block the bullets. He vibrated the air in front of him at such a high frequency that it created a pocket of zero pressure. The bullets hit the wall of silence and simply dropped to the floor, their kinetic energy erased. Naruto vanished. He appeared in the center of the agents. He didn't punch them, he tapped their chests with the same, gentle, rhythm he had used on the scrap metal. Hush step. Heartbeat sync. One by one, the agents collapsed. They weren't dead, but their hearts had been tuned to a frequency that put them into a deep, instant sleep. A dangerous realization. As the last agent fell, a small mechanical spider crawled out of the leader's pocket. It projected a hologram of a man with a scarred face and a purple mask, Spandam. Enjoy your little victory, Ghost, the hologram sneered. But we now have the data. Your weaving isn't just a martial art. It's the same energy signature as the power source used by the ancient kingdom. You aren't just a pirate, you're a living key. The hologram faded, and the spider self-destructed. Tom looked at Naruto, his expression uncharacteristically grave. Naruto, the power you are developing, it's older than the sea itself. If the government thinks you can unlock the past, they will never stop until the world is in flames. Naruto looked at his hands, which were now glowing with a soft, steady azure light. Then I guess I'll have to find the past before they do. Chapter 12. The Ship of Echoes. The revelation of the ancient frequency hung heavy in the salt-crusted air of Tom's workers. Naruto now understood why the world government was so desperate to capture him. He wasn't just a boy who had escaped a cage, he was a walking vibration of a lost civilization. If you're going to sail the Grand Line with a target on your back, Tom said, wiping grease from his brow, you can't do it in a rowboat. You need a vessel that can speak the same language as you. The birth of the Azure Requiem. For the next month, Naruto became more than a student of martial arts, he became a shipwright's apprentice. Under Tom's booming guidance and Frankie's super engineering, they began a secret project in the hidden basement of Dock Number 1. They didn't use standard oak. They used atom wood scraps that Tom had been saving for years, reinforced with a specialized, vibration-conductive, alloy Frankie had cooked up in his lab. Watch this, Naruto, Frankie shouted, welding a plate of the blue-tinted metal to the keel. When you channel your weaving into the helm, the whole ship will vibrate at a frequency that reduces water friction to zero. You won't just sail, you'll glide. Naruto spent his nights tuning the ship. He sat in the center of the hull, eyes closed, spreading his energy through every plank and nail. He was weaving his own spirit into the wood, creating a bond that made the ship an extension of his own body. The midnight ambush. The ship was nearly finished when the air in Water 7 grew unnaturally still. Naruto's sensory weaving picked up a massive presence approaching from the sea, not the mechanical hum of CP7, but something cold, sharp, and overwhelming. Tom-san, Frankie, get to the lower tunnels, Naruto commanded, his voice vibrating with warning. He's here. Who's here? Frankie asked, clutching a wrench. An admiral. A flash of blinding light illuminated the workshop, followed by a slow, drawling voice. Oh ho, so this is where the little ghost is hiding. How very scary. Admiral Kizaru stood on the bridge above the workshop, his hands in his pockets, looking down with a bored expression. Light versus frequency. Kizaru didn't wait. He pointed a finger. Yasukani no Magatama. Hundreds of deadly orbs of light rained down toward the workshop. Tom and Frankie dove for cover, but Naruto stepped out onto the pier. He didn't use a dome this time. He knew light was too fast for a static shield. He began to spin his hands in a complex, circular motion, creating a vortex of resonance. Weaving. Prismatic refraction. As the light beams hit the vibrating air around Naruto, they didn't explode. The frequency of the air was tuned to bend the light. The beams curved around the workshop, striking the water instead and sending massive plumes of steam into the sky. Kizaru tilted his head, his sunglasses glinting. Bending light with sound. That's quite a trick. But can you keep up with the speed of light itself? Kizaru vanished and reappeared directly in front of Naruto, his leg glowing with immense heat. Have you ever been kicked at the speed of light? The first flight. Naruto didn't try to block. He knew his bones would vaporize. Instead, he slammed his palms onto the deck of the unfinished ship behind him. Azure Requiem. Resonance overdrive. The ship didn't just move, it screamed. A massive pulse of azure energy erupted from the keel, creating a shockwave so powerful it momentarily pushed even Kizaru back. Frankie, launch it now, Naruto roared. Frankie hit the emergency release lever. The ship slid down the ramp, but it didn't hit the water with a splash. It hit the water and levitated 3 inches above the surface, held up by a cushion of high-frequency air. Naruto leapt onto the deck, grabbing the helm. He didn't use a sail. He pushed his weaving into the ship's core. The Azure Requiem shot forward like a railgun slug, leaving a trail of white mist and blue sparks. Kizaru tried to follow, transforming into a beam of light, but the ship was moving in a jagged, unpredictable, vibration pattern that made it impossible for the Admiral to lock onto a target. Into the mist. As the lights of Water 7 faded into the distance, Naruto slumped at the wheel, his hands smoking from the friction. They had escaped an admiral, but the world was now officially at war with him. Well, Frankie panted, looking at the glowing blue deck of their new home. That was super terrifying. Where to now, Captain? Naruto looked at the log pose on his wrist. It wasn't pointing to the next island. It was spinning wildly, reacting to the massive energy he had just unleashed. We need a crew, Naruto said, his sapphire eyes hardening. And I know exactly where the next voice is calling from. The ship turned toward the dark clouds of the Florian Triangle. Chapter 13. The Symphony of the Dead. The azure requiem glided into the Florian Triangle like a needle piercing a funeral shroud. The mist here wasn't just thick, it was heavy, damp, and tasted of old secrets. Behind the helm, Naruto felt the ship's vibration change. The atom wood was humming a low, uneasy tune, reacting to the absolute silence of the graveyard sea. "This place is giving me the creeps, Naruto," Frankie shouted, though he tried to look super by flexing. "Even the sea currents here sound like they're whispering." "They are whispering, Frankie," Naruto replied, his sapphire eyes glowing faintly in the dark. "The fog here is vibrating at a frequency of grief. It's stagnant." The ghostly melody. Suddenly, the silence was broken. It wasn't a scream or a cannon blast. It was the thin, haunting scratch of a violin. Yo ho ho ho. Yo ho ho ho. A massive, tattered galleon emerged from the mist like a titan's corpse. On its deck stood a tall, skeletal figure in a top hat, bowing a violin with bony fingers. Naruto didn't draw a weapon. He closed his eyes. Through his sensory weaving, he didn't see a monster. He saw a soul that was vibrating in perfect, lonely resonance with the mist. "His heart," Naruto whispered. "It's gone, but the voice of his spirit is louder than anyone I've ever met." The soul's resonance. Naruto jumped from the azure requiem, using the hush step to walk across the surface of the water as if it were solid glass. He landed on the deck of the ghost ship. The skeleton stopped playing. His jaw dropped, literally. "Yo ho ho. A guest. My eyes would be wide with shock, but I don't have any eyes." Skull joke. "You're Brook, aren't you?" Naruto asked, sensing the deep, rhythmic hum of the skeleton's soul. "You've been playing that song for 50 years to keep the madness away." Brook froze. The humor vanished from his hollow sockets. "How can you know the length of my silence, young man?" "I can hear the frequency of your soul," Naruto said, stepping closer. "It's out of tune. You're holding onto a promise that is vibrating so hard it's tearing you apart." The shadow of Thriller bark. Before Brook could respond, the ocean floor seemed to rise. A massive, jagged wall of stone and iron surrounded both ships. They hadn't just sailed into a fog, they had sailed into the mouth of the giant island ship, Thriller bark. A shadow loomed over them, a man of impossible height with a stitched neck and a wicked grin. "Gecko Moria. Kishishishi. What do we have here?" Moria laughed, his shadow stretching out across the deck like a living oil spill. "A cyborg, a skeleton, and a boy who smells like the world government's greatest nightmare." Moria's shadow lunged, attempting to grab Naruto's feet to steal his shadow. "Don't touch his resonance," Brook cried, raising his cane sword. Weaving the soul, Naruto didn't move. As Moria's shadow touched his boots, Naruto slammed his foot into the deck. Weaving. Soul beat overdrive. Naruto didn't just vibrate his body, he projected his will through the floorboards. A pulse of pure azure energy rippled outward. When the shadow touched the frequency, it didn't just stop, it shattered like glass. Moria gasped, clutching his chest. What did you do to my shadows?" "Shadows are just the frequency of the body's memory," Naruto said, his hair flickering with white light. "If I change the frequency, the memory disappears. You can't hold what you don't understand, Moria." Naruto turned to Brook. "Your music is beautiful, but it's incomplete. You're missing the bass, the heartbeat of a crew. Join me, and we'll play a song that the whole world will have to dance to." Brook looked at the boy, then at the glowing ship waiting in the mist. For the first time in half a century, the skeleton felt a vibration of hope. "I am already dead," Brook said, drawing his blade with a flourish. "But it would be a pleasure to spend my afterlife with a conductor like you. Let us finish this." Dawn, with a solo. The new trio, with Frankie's cannons, Brook's soul-chilling swordsmanship, and Naruto's world-shattering weaving, Moria's zombies didn't stand a chance. By the time the sun began to rise through the fog, Thriller bark was a smoking ruin, and the Azure Requiem had a new member. Next stop, Frankie asked, tuning his guitar alongside Brooke's violin. Naruto Low Chapter 14. The Archipelago of Bubbles. The azure requiem sliced through the final veil of the Florian Triangle, emerging into the shimmering light of the Sabayati archipelago. The sight was breathtaking, giant mangrove trees rising from the sea, secreting special resins that created millions of floating, iridescent bubbles. But for Naruto, the beauty was a mask. His sensory weaving was screaming. The island was a chaotic mess of frequencies. The desperate, low hum of slaves in chains, the arrogant, sharp vibrations of celestial dragons, and the cold, metallic pulse of hidden marine warships. This island is out of tune, Brooke noted, his bony fingers tightening on his violin. It sounds like 1,000 broken heartstrings. The scholar in the shadows. Naruto didn't head for the main groves. He steered the ship toward Grove 13, a lawless area where the voice he was tracking felt the strongest. It was a cold, intellectual resonance, ancient and weary. They found her in a dim tavern called Shacky's Rip-Off Bar. Nico Robin sat in a corner, a book in her hand and a glass of wine on the table. She didn't look up when they entered, but her hand shifted, ready to sprout limbs from the floorboards. "You're late," she said, her voice like velvet. "The CP0 agents are already 3 blocks away." Naruto pulled off his hood, his white streaked hair catching the dim light. "I'm not with the government, Robin. My name is Naruto. I'm the frequency they can't catch." Robin finally looked up, her dark eyes widening slightly. "The ghost of Amazon Lily. I've read about your bounty. You're the one who speaks the language of the ancient kingdom." The auction house incident. Before they could speak further, a massive explosion rocked the grove. A scream echoed from the nearby human auction house. "Someone I know is in there," Naruto growled, his sapphire eyes flashing. "And the resonance coming from that building, it's the same as the cage I grew up in." Naruto didn't run, he vibrated. In a blur of azure light, he vanished, reappearing inside the auction house just as a celestial dragon raised a pistol toward a captive mermaid. Hush step. Absolute zero. Naruto appeared in front of the mermaid. He didn't touch the celestial dragon. He simply clapped his hands. A concentrated blast of high-frequency sound hit the air, shattering every glass display, every wine bottle, and every pair of slave shackles in the room simultaneously. The celestial dragon fell back in shock. A commoner. Guards. Kill him. Call the admirals. The convergence of kings. Suddenly, the heavy doors of the auction house burst open. A group of pirates rushed in, led by a boy in a straw hat with a scar under his eye. "Give back my friend," Luffy roared. Naruto and Luffy locked eyes. The air between them crackled. Luffy's haki was like a roaring fire, while Naruto's weaving was like a deep, humming ocean. 2 different powers, but the same voice of freedom. "You're the one from the news," Luffy said, grinning despite the chaos. "The masked guy. And you're the one making all the noise," Naruto replied, a small smile forming on his face. "Want to help me finish this, Don?" The admiral's return. The sky outside darkened as yellow sparks began to rain from the sky. Admiral Kizaru had arrived, but he wasn't alone. Behind him stood the pacifistas, mechanical monsters built with the same voice of the ancient kingdom that Naruto carried. "Oh ho, 2 troublesome rookies in one place," Kizaru drawled, his finger glowing with lethal light. "This is going to be very flashy." Naruto stood between the slaves and the admiral. He looked at Luffy, then back at his own crew. "Robin, Frankie, Brooke, get the captives to the Requiem. Luffy, your crew takes the right. I'll handle the light." Naruto's hands began to glow a blinding, crystalline blue. He wasn't just weaving his own energy anymore, he was pulling the resonance from the giant mangrove trees themselves. Weaving. Nature's Symphony. Octet, a small, dark vibe card he had found in Moria's treasure room. It was vibrating with a cold, desperate energy. "The archipelago," Naruto said. "There's a girl there who knows the language of the stones. And the Marines are closing in on her." Chapter 15. The Dark King's Resonance. The air in Grove 13 didn't just vibrate, it felt like it was being shredded. On one side, Admiral Kizaru stood like a pillar of golden light. On the other, the Straw Hat Pirates and Naruto's crew stood their ground. Kizaru raised his foot, the light intensifying to a blinding degree. Speed is weight. Have you ever? I've heard the line before, Admiral, Naruto interrupted. He stepped forward, his feet leaving glowing azure footprints on the resin-covered grass. But light is just a frequency. And every frequency has a counter note. The clash of titans. Kizaru kicked. A beam of pure destruction tore through the air. At the same moment, Luffy roared, "Gear second," and vanished into a blur of steam and speed. But Naruto was faster. He didn't move toward Kizaru, he moved toward the light. Weaving. Harmonic phase. Naruto's body began to shimmer. He tuned his own molecular vibration to match the speed of the incoming photons. The beam passed through him as if he were a ghost, striking a mangrove tree behind him. Luffy's fist, coated in haki, slammed into Kizaru's side, but the Admiral turned into light to dodge. "Oh ho, you two are very synchronized," Kizaru drawled, his hand forming a sword of pure light. "Ama no Murakumo. Enter the Dark King." Just as the light sword swung toward Naruto's neck, a silver-haired man in a simple cloak stepped out of the shadows. He didn't use a devil fruit. He didn't use a fancy technique. He simply drew a rusted blade and blocked Kizaru's light sword with a single, sharp clang. The shockwave of the impact sent the pacifistas skidding backward. Silver's Rayleigh. Kizaru sighed, his bored expression finally turning serious. "The Dark King himself. Are you planning to interfere with the law?" "The law is a bit too loud today, Borsellino," Rayleigh said, his eyes glinting behind his glasses. He looked at Naruto, a knowing smile playing on his lips. "And this boy, he's playing a song I haven't heard since I was on the Oro Jackson. The Secret of the Ancient Echo. Everyone, run," Rayleigh commanded. "I'll hold him here. Naruto, take your crew and the Straw Hats toward Grove 41. There's something you need to see." Naruto hesitated, but he felt the voice of Rayleigh. It was as deep and steady as the foundation of the world. He grabbed Luffy by the collar, who was still trying to fight, and signaled Frankie and Brook. "We're moving. Now." They sprinted through the bubble-filled forest, weaving between the giant roots. When they reached a secluded clearing, Rayleigh appeared behind them, breathing only slightly harder. "How did you get here so fast?" Luffy panted. "I didn't," Rayleigh said, looking at Naruto. "I used the same thing you're discovering, young man. But while you call it weaving, the ancient kingdom called it the pulse of the world. The final lesson of Sabayati." Rayleigh sat on a root and looked at Naruto's sapphire eyes. "You think you're manipulating sound or vibration. But you're actually touching the will of the objects around you. That's why you can bend light and shatter steel. You're talking to the voice of all things and forcing it to change its tune." "But it's killing me," Naruto said, looking at his white-streaked hair. "The strain is too much." "Because you're trying to be the conductor of a storm," Rayleigh explained. "To master the pulse, you must not just lead the music, you must be the music. If you don't learn to stabilize your core, the next time you use infinite echo, your own body will turn to dust." Suddenly, the ground shook. A massive shadow fell over them. It wasn't Kizaru. It was the giant, Bible-clutching figure of Bartholomew Kuma. "If you were to go on a trip," Kuma whispered, his paw-pad hands glowing with a strange, repelling energy. "Where would you like to go?" Naruto stepped in front of his crew, his hands glowing. "Not today, Kuma. My story isn't over yet."